Hello, I'm Laura Boudreau. I'm representing the World Bank Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance Program. We're co-hosting a session tomorrow morning with the government of South Africa on advancing risk assessment for financial applications. So why care about the financial impacts of disasters and the financial risk management? Well, we've been hearing it all day. Economic and insured losses from disasters are on the rise. And in the past 20 years, we've experienced a series of catastrophic loss years, unlike any we've ever expected or seen before. In 1995, the Kobe earthquake drove losses to almost twice what had been experienced in previous years. And in the 2000s, we saw a series of disaster events so extreme that they led Time magazine to label the decade from hell. But we know that disasters are going to continue to happen and that economic losses will continue to rise. So in 2011, we saw this with almost $400 billion worth of losses from disasters. But the international community has taken note, and financial resilience has become increasingly important on decision-makers' agenda. And typically when we talk about financial resilience, we break it into sovereign disaster risk financing and property or catastrophe risk insurance market development to increase access to insurance products. Now, both of these rely on probabilistic catastrophe risk modeling, which is financial risk assessment. It's a very specific subset of risk assessment much more broadly. And I decided, and based on the theme of our conference this week, the probabilistic risk assessment takes hazard and exposure data, uses it to derive vulnerability, which is then used to estimate damage to buildings and translates that into expected loss metrics. So now, in honoring the theme of our conference of mapping global risk, I decided to undertake my own little exercise in mapping global risk models. And I decided that I would look at the dominant catastrophe risk modeling firms. So I understand there's a lot of firms out there that are doing this work, and insurance industry has their own internal models as well. But I wanted to see what supported the majority of catastrophe risk premiums. So I looked at earthquake, I looked at weather, windstorm, and I looked at flood. And I wanted to identify areas where there could be potential gaps in financial risk assessment that would make it difficult to engage in a proactive approach to risk financing. And clearly, while for some perils we have some pretty good modeling like earthquake in yellow, for others like flood, very few countries actually have these models. So what does this mean in practice? Well, for Thailand, it meant that in 2011, when it experienced its catastrophic flood event, it had never in its historical record seen those types of losses. And it made it really difficult to understand what the potential losses there could be. So my team last summer did an assessment of the entire Southeast Asian Association of Nations, and we estimated for a 1 in 100 year event about 17.9 billion worth of losses across the region using historical and probabilistic data. In one country, 1 year, one event. For Thailand, we saw 22 billion. Now, luckily, as we heard before, policymakers are taking note, and the government of Mexico, under its presidency of the G20, has put this on the high-level agenda of finance ministers, in particular with a focus on risk assessment and risk financing. Now, I was going to say, if you haven't already heard about it on Twitter, but we already heard about it tonight, the World Bank and the government of Mexico just released a joint report on advancing risk assessment for financial applications. And luckily, we have some of the contributing countries, as well as others, here with us this week to talk about their own experience in using risk assessment for financial applications. So the Swiss Economic Corporation is going to talk about how they've integrated financial risk management of disasters into their broader sustainable economic development framework. From Mexico, Ministry of Finance is going to present on how it developed its own in-house catastrophe risk model to enhance and improve its disaster risk financing approach. From the South Africa, we have the Insurance Association to talk about how it's using a public-private partnership with the government of South Africa to advance risk assessment. We have a representative from Malawi to explain how since 2008 they've been using a weather hedge, a weather derivative, to hedge against drought risk. And the National Treasury of South Africa will talk about how sub-Saharan countries are working together to take a regional approach to drought risk financing. So come tomorrow morning, check us out, Advancing Risk Assessments for Financial Applications. We have Ken Terry, the head of the National Disaster Management Center of South Africa, chairing the session. Olivier Maul, who's program coordinator for the Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance Program at the bank, will moderate. And then Andrew Julies from the National Treasury will provide closing remarks. So tomorrow, 9 a.m., room 1.43. We hope to see you all there.